Video games did not develop in a completely linear fashion. Game developers eventually moved from 8-bit to 16-bit and to 32 bits and beyond, but with a good amount of overlap. Sega often made arcade games, 8-bit games, and 16-bit games at the same time. Even when Sega had their own home 16-bit game console on the market with the MegaDrive and Genesis, they continued to put out 8-bit versions of their software lineup in order to get every single yen, dollar, pound, and Brazilian real out of gamers' pockets that still played 8-bit Sega consoles. I'm gonna take a look at 22 8-bit Sega Master System games that were based on more powerful arcade or 16-bit games. These 8-bit Sega games are not without polish and charm and are great games in their own right. Then I'll cover 3 that are not as good as they could have been. And I'm also going to cover the best way to play Sega Master System games in 2023. So make sure you stick around for that. But before that, I need you to make sure that you are subscribed to this channel, since I'm going to be making more awesome retro video game videos in the future. Now, on to the games. Streets of Rage for Sega Master System, from 1993. This is the game that inspired this video. Not only is it a good version of Streets of Rage, it's a darn good game in its own right. It has bumping Yuzo Koshiro music with some of the best use of the Master System sound chips. It has really good gameplay, but sadly it's one player only. It uses the pause button to launch super attacks by pressing button 2 when paused, since the Master System only has 2 buttons on the controller and the pause button is on the console. It does not use the same graphics as the Game Gear version and is at a higher resolution. It represents some of the best graphics on the Master System, way better than anything on the NES, and they did it all without memory mapper chip upgrades. This is a perfect example of Sega supporting 8-bit systems well into the 16-bit era. And if you had to play one game from this list, make it Streets of Rage for Master System. Sonic the Hedgehog for Master System, 1991. This is the other game that inspired this video. It is very similar to the Game Gear version, but the Master System version shows more of the action. It is very fast, very fun, and has unique levels, and it's not a direct one-to-one version of Sonic the Hedgehog for Sega Genesis, but it's its own game with its own levels and challenges. This still has a ton of Sonic attitude, flavor, and speed. Despite Sonic being one of the quintessential 16-bit mascot platform games, his first 8-bit outing is phenomenal. Not only would Sega of Europe bundle this version of the game with the redesigned Master System, but they put the game on the BIOS for some version of the Master System too, so the game would be built into the console if you don't have a cartridge inserted. Start with Streets of Rage for Master System before moving on to Sonic the Hedgehog for Master System. Gotta go 8-bit Sega fast. Special mention, Ninja Princess for Sega SG-1000 from 1983. The Sega SG-1000 was an 8-bit console released by Sega in 1983 and only in Japan. It was their first home game console. It was trounced by the Nintendo Famicom that released on the same day. The SG-1000 had similar graphic architecture as the ColecoVision, and Sega would later upgrade it with the Sega Mark III that later became the Master System. They also released the Sega Mark II. It was a redesigned console, but did not have graphical upgrades. In 1983, Sega took their fun action arcade game Ninja Princess and brought it to the SG-1000. It's pretty impressive considering that the SG-1000 was severely limited by the number of colors that each sprite could have and did not have hardware scrolling. This is a flat-out action ninja game, and you play as Ninja Princess Kurumi, who everyone is trying to murder. A ton of ninjas constantly run at her, and you have a split second to react by either throwing a knife straight ahead or in the direction that you are walking. They would later make an updated version of this for the Sega Mark III and Master System by changing the princess into a generic ninja dude. However, I just really like the simplistic graphics and Japanese storytelling. This would be a good game to play before watching Hidden Fortress by Akira Kurosawa. The Ninja for Master System from 1986. It is an upgraded port of the Ninja Princess arcade game on the more powerful Sega Mark III Master System hardware. Unfortunately, they made the game's protagonist a generic ninja dude, and our heroine, Kuromi the Sega Ninja Princess, was captured by bad ninjas, even in the Japanese version. This one has better scrolling and even better ninja action, but I wish that Princess Kurumi was a playable character. But this really brings home the fast Sega Ninja action of the arcade game that I love on my Sega Astro City Mini. This game is brutally difficult, as was many early Sega games. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for Master System from 1992. Sega followed up Sonic the Hedgehog for Master System with what else but Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for Master System. This is based on the Game Gear version, but with a little bit more graphics on screen. It has Tails in it, but it's supposed to be a conversion of Sonic 2 for Sega MegaDrive, but the level layout is almost completely different, so I actually debated including this in here, because it's almost a completely original game. But it's Sonic, it's 8-bit, and it's quite good. Wonder Boy for Master System from 1987. Based on the 1986 arcade game, this was the closest thing that the Sega Master System had to a Super Mario Bros. Style game for a long time. It is almost an arcade-accurate port. Now, if this looks familiar, it's because Hudson's Adventure Island was an updated adaptation of Wonder Boy. Wonder Boy would later go off into different genres, but it started right here as a running and jumping action game. Very colorful, great controls, and it's a lot of fun. Space Harrier for Master System from 1987. Sega's team of programmers and game designers had hard work cut out for them by making first-party produced Master System games when they had to take popular games that were based on powerful Sega arcade hardware at the time and try to get them working on the modest but capable Sega Master System. Space Harrier for the arcade was based on a state-of-the-art superscalar hardware which could manipulate a ton of sprites in real time to simulate a 3D effect. Sega's programmers working on the Master System version used an innovative technique of rendering sprites as background images to get more simulated graphic scaling out of the Master System. They couldn't have overlays so that the edges are blocky. It's not the most elegant option, but it works. And I remember being very impressed with this version of Space Harrier when I saw it back in 1987. It really is a creative version of a quintessential Sega game. Rastan for Sega Master System from 1989. Taito's movie-inspired barbarian action game got a pretty impressive Sega Master System home version that had a pretty good approximation of the 2D platformer sword action and the iconic music. We never got an arcade port on other platforms, but the Sega Master System version is not slacking and is one of the more awesome games on the system. Hang On for Master System from 1986. Hang On in the arcade was Yu Suzuki's Need for Speed using Sega's Superscalar technology. They actually put together a pretty fun but simple home version on the Sega Master System. This was a big step up from the earlier SG-1000 version of Hang On. It's a pretty simple game where you race a motorbike against a timer, but it was Sega arcade history back in the day. Just ask Ryo Suzuki in Shenmue and Kiru in Walk Like a Dragon / Yakuza games. Outrun for Master System from 1987. Just like how the motorbike racing game Hang On was followed up by a car racing game Outrun in the arcades, thus was Hang On for Master System followed up by Outrun for Master System. This is the game that would inspire a generation of synthwave and is one of the most quintessential 80s racing games. This is the game that popularized the whole branching paths in racing games. The Master System version is one of the best looking 8-bit racing games. Shinobi for Master System from 1988. Sega's genre-defining side-scrolling ninja action game was first brought home to the Sega Master System in this version. It is a bit simpler than the arcade version, but it still is a lot of fun to throw shuriken into the face of bad guys and rescue ninja hostages. Even if they couldn't deliver the same graphics, Sega could deliver the gameplay experience of Shinobi. Fantasy Zone for Master System from 1986. The arcade version of Fantasy Zone was one of the first shoot-'em-up games, and they brought it home with multi-directional scrolling, weapon shop power-up upgrades. This is the game that made Opa Opa one of the unofficial Sega mascots along with Alex Kidd in the mid to late 1980s, until a certain blue hedgehog showed up. Tectoy's Street Fighter II for Master System from 1997. The most insane Master System game that definitely punches above its weight class. This port was apparently developed by Brazilian tech company Tectoy before they got authorization from Capcom. It is a little faster than it should be, but it's amazing that they were able to get a Street Fighter II-like experience out of the Master System. It even has voice samples and pretty detailed graphics. The controls are pretty Spartan because the controller only has 2 buttons. It is a little tough to play this game because it is a PAL Master System game and I couldn't get it working on original NTSC hardware, so I had to use my RetroPie. Tectoy is a bunch of video game developing madmen, and this is their masterpiece. For those of you that don't know, Brazil had pretty tough tariffs on imported video game systems, so Sega licensed their systems to Brazilian toy manufacturer Tectoy, and they did a lot more than expected with the 8-bit hardware, and continued to make games a lot longer after the Master System development stopped in other regions. Brazil in the 90s and 80s was almost a completely alternative reality where Nintendo did not exist. It was all Sega and all Tectoy. I absolutely should do some videos about Tectoy and the Master System in the future. This game is an insane testament to what Brazilian ingenuity can do with the Sega 8-bit hardware.
You win!
Dynamite Heady for Master System from 1995. The maniac programmers at Tectoy took Treasure's Sega Game Gear version of their highly creative, innovative, and pretty insane platform action game and upgraded the 8-bit graphics from the Game Gear to the Master System and released it in Brazil. It is crazy that Sega had moved on to the Sega Saturn by this time, but Tectoy was still making great games for the 8-bit Master System in 1995. Altered Beast for Master System from 1989. Altered Beast works really well as an 8-bit game. It's sort of surprising considering this was the original pack-in game for the Sega Genesis when it was released in America. The character sprites are pretty big, and you actually feel like a big, powerful dude beating up mythological creatures and monsters and whatnot. The graphics are actually pretty high resolution for the Master System, and it even has digitized speech. May you rise from your grave and power up. Afterburner for Master System, 1988. Afterburner was yet another Sega arcade hit using superscalar technology, but this time it was a flight combat game clearly inspired by the movie Top Gun. The Master System version is visually impressive, pretty fast and pretty hard, but it still looks better than Konami's Top Gun for the NES. Galaxy Force for Master System, 1989. So, Sega used superscalar technology to make motorbike racing, car racing, airplane flying, so why not spaceship flying? This is a pretty ambitious superscalar arcade game brought home with some of the same graphical fire effects. It's impressive that they were doing this on 8-bit hardware. Ghouls and Ghosts for Master System from 1991. It is a really good Sega conversion of Capcom's platform action arcade game. Not only did they make a freaking amazing Sega MegaDrive version, but they made a very, very decent Sega Master System version. It is awesome. Mortal Kombat for Master System, 1991. So, Mortal Kombat was absolutely everywhere, and Probe put together a pretty impressive 8-bit version for the Sega Game Gear. But since the Master System was still growing strong in Europe, the Master System got a respectable port of Mortal Kombat. So not only is there a Street Fighter II on the Master System, but there's a Mortal Kombat, and it plays a lot like Mortal Kombat, and looks a lot like Mortal Kombat, but 8-bit. This version was only released in Europe. R-Type for Master System from 1989. I have a special place in my heart for really good arcade games made by third parties that Sega licensed and converted to either the Master System or the Mega Drive. Irene's R-Type was one of the best spaceship shooters on any platform, and Sega put out the best conversion of this game until the more powerful PC Engine TurboGrafx version arrived. Rampage for Master System from 1989. Rampage really shows that the Master System is more powerful than the NES and Famicom, and the graphics are a lot more detailed. The sprites are bigger, and the two-player simultaneous action is a lot more fun in destroying cities as giant monsters that are clearly inspired by movie kaiju and King Kong. Double Dragon for Master System from 1988. Unlike the NES version, the Sega Master System version of Double Dragon features two-player simultaneous action and could feature 3 bad guys at once. It had a little pixel flicker, but they were able to develop a much closer version of the arcade experience than the NES and Famicom version of Double Dragon. 16-bit to Master System games that are not as fun as I remember. Now, I try to understand that no bad game started off as a bad game, and it was often the result of external factors or technical limitations. However, there are 3 games that I want to talk about that are disappointing because other teams were able to deliver much more rewarding experiences on the Master System. Streets of Rage 2 for Master System from 1994. This version comes across a little too fast and choppy. It was made from the Game Gear version and was released in Europe. I don't know if it might be PAL native and runs way too fast on my US NTSC Genesis system. I had such high hopes coming off of the first one, but it was nowhere near as good. I tried it again on my RetroPie to see if it was a PAL game and what it would look like in a PAL Virtual Master System. Well, Streets of Rage 1 for the Master System was amazing, and the second one comes across as a bit of a letdown. Golden Axe for Master System, 1990. I had very high hopes for this game, seeing Sega's success in bringing Altered Beast to the Master System. The graphics were quite large and detailed, but the animation was choppy and fast, and it was released on NTSC systems so that the TV and power differences wasn't an issue. It just didn't feel like Golden Axe. It came across very haphazard and didn't have the deliberate crowd control functionality of the beat-em-up game. And not only this game is one player, but there's only Axe Battler. You can select other magical styles of the other characters, but not the other characters. That is a little weak sauce. My Hero for Master System from 1986. Now, I sort of fell in love with My Hero from the arcade version on my Sega Astro City Mini. However, when I tried the Master System version, I was instantly killed over and over again. Whoever developed this game didn't spend any time playtesting it, because while the original arcade game was challenging, it was sort of fair. The bad guys in this version of the game come at you repeatedly and constantly, but they seem to be able to punch faster and kill you instantly. I have not been able to progress in this game because it is brutally difficult, almost kusoge, and not the wacky fun kind. The graphics look okay, and it sounds okay, but that's pointless because this game is virtually unplayable. I really like the arcade game, but this is the opposite of fun. Best ways to play Sega Master System games in 2023. The Sega Master System hasn't gotten re-release retro attention that other game systems have enjoyed. There is no Sega Master System Mini Classic, and there has yet to be any big collections of Sega Master System games released on modern game platforms. However, there are a number of ways that you can play 8-bit Sega Master System gaming goodness. Original hardware. The Sega Master System had two versions released in the West. There is the original triangle-shaped version, which has excellent RGB-capable output and really good composite AV output. It is even compatible with HD Retrovision's component cables and most of the Sega Genesis to HDMI adapter cables, such as the one made by Hyperkin. It is not marked so on the box, but it works, according to many Sega Master System gamers online. Then there was the redesigned, smaller, compact Sega Master System 2, which was RF only. If I had to choose one, I would probably go for the original system because of its more advanced graphical output options. The original also has the ability to play Sega SG-1000 games using an EverDrive. It also seems to be the version which is more readily available. It is not as common as the Sega Genesis Mark I or Mark II, but it's not crazy rare. It is completely possible to find a Sega Master System at an independent retro game shop near you. By the way, these look great on CRT TVs. You can also use a Sega Genesis Mark I AC adapter, video cords, and Sega Genesis 3-button controller. Both Master System designs might need to have the capacitors replaced at this point. The systems are getting more rare, especially for the compact model. Some people are importing the European versions and having them modded to NTSC output. If I had this space next to my CRT TVs, I would seriously consider getting an OG Sega Master System. Sega Power Base Converter. The Sega Power Base Converter was an add-on for the original Sega Genesis that featured a miniaturized Sega Master System motherboard that interfaced with the Sega Genesis by plugging into the cartridge slot. It does not require any additional video cables or power adapters, and it couldn't be simpler. There is a pause button directly on the unit, and it takes both Sega cards and cartridges. It works great on a CRT TV, and you can plug it into a modern TV if you have an HDMI adapter coming out of your Sega Genesis. This was the original Sega Genesis Tower of Power. Now, it doesn't directly fit into the Sega Genesis Mark II, however, it's common to see these plastic cases on the rear of the unit ground down so it will fit into a Sega Genesis Mark II. The used game shop that I purchased mine from actually lowered the price of this on the unit that I got because of this modification. And I actually find it desirable because I wouldn't mind plugging into both of my Sega Genesis units, including my Mark II. One downside is that you cannot run SG-1000 games off an EverDrive or through the card slot. I currently do not own a real Sega Master System, but I'm not missing out because I will buy Sega Master System cartridges and use it with my Power Base converter. I consider the Power Base converter to be original hardware because it is made by Sega and it is an accurate way to play Sega Master System games. Both the Terraonion Mega SD and the MegaEverDrive allow you to play Sega Genesis games off an SD card on an original Genesis system. However, the FPGA circuits contained within can also be configured to run Sega Master System games even with the optional FM Synth sound unit, which was not released in the West. It works great on original hardware. And you even have to hit the little button on the side of the cartridge to pause the virtual Sega Master System. My only complaint is when you use an original Sega Master System gamepad on the Genesis, it registered as buttons 1 and 2 as buttons B and C, and both the MegaEverDrive and the Mega SD require you to hit button A to launch a game, so you have to swap out the controllers just to launch a game. I find it insane that hardware that was designed to simulate Genesis cartridges can run a full-blown accurate Sega Master System with FPGA wizardry and witchcraft. Emulation. The Sega Master System is easily emulated by just about everything that can emulate video games. That includes PC, Mac, RetroPie, Linux handhelds like the Mu Mini, and Android handhelds and consoles like the Hyperkin Retron 5. Sega Master System around the world. The Sega Master System only sold 2 million consoles in North America and 1 million in Japan, but sold a whopping 7 million units in Western Europe and 8 million units in Brazil. Many of these 8-bit versions of Sega games were released outside North America. Sega's portable Game Gear system was based on the 8-bit Sega Master System hardware, but both had different graphics resolutions and dimensions. But the similarities under the hood allowed for very similar 8-bit games to be on both the Master System and the Game Gear. Sega entered the home console market in 1983 with the SG-1000, and then continued their 8-bit architecture in the upgraded Sega Mark III, the Master System, and the Game Gear. Then Tectoy took over and continued to develop Master System games well into the late 90s. Sega really was the master about getting every drop of performance out of the Z80 processor. A lot of Americans were completely oblivious to this because of the success of Nintendo, but Brazilian and European gamers have fond memories of the Master System when they think of 8-bit games. Sega was the master of getting 16-bit-like performance out of 8-bit hardware. Even if you could easily play the more powerful 16-bit originals, some of Sega's 8-bit versions have an amusing charm and flavor all of their own. Back in the day, 8-bit versions of more powerful games were looked down on, but the older that I get, the more appealing 8-bit games are to me. I dream of the day that Sega decides to announce a Sega Master System Mini or an official collection of Sega Master System games for modern consoles. There are a lot of us that remember Sega before the Genesis, and the company needs to remember that. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe because I make videos like this every weekend. This is 8-Bit Joystick. Stay awesome. Play retro. Arcade games, 8-bit games, and 16-bit games at the same